The cab driver blocks the doors and threatens the woman, but he has no idea who her husband is. Tensions rise and the situation turns out in a completely unexpected way. Subscribe, watch the video, and share your impressions in the comments. The evening city hummed with life. Streetlights flickered on, casting a pale yellow glow over the wet asphalt, and the distant buzz of traffic blended with the occasional chatter of pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks. The air was warm, holding the remnants of a summer day, though a slight breeze hinted at the approaching night. For many, this was just another evening, filled with mundane routines and small pleasures. For Layla, it was supposed to be the same, a peaceful end to a taxing day. Layla adjusted her blazer as she stepped out of the office building. The long day had left her shoulders heavy, but her expression remained composed. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she navigated the bustling street. She was proud of her independence and the career she had built on her own terms. The day had been a storm of negotiations, emails, and subtle tensions in meetings, leaving her with little energy to spare. All she wanted now was to reach the comfort of her home, curl up with a book, and let the stress melt away. Unlocking her phone, she opened the rideshare app. The familiar interface glowed softly on the screen as she selected her destination, a straightforward route to her apartment across the city. The estimated fare and time seemed reasonable, and she pressed the book button without hesitation. Within moments, a notification pinged. Her driver, Harry, was on the way. The car arrived sooner than expected, pulling up to the curb with a soft screech of brakes. It was an older model sedan, clean but slightly outdated. Layla hesitated for a moment, her instincts catching on something subtle she couldn't quite place, but she dismissed it as overthinking. The app had assigned this ride, and it had a decent rating. She stepped toward the vehicle, the driver already lowering the window to confirm her identity. "Layla?" the man asked, his voice gruff but polite enough. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with short graying hair and a weary expression. His uniform, a plain polo and slacks, was neat but unremarkable. "Yes," she replied, offering a faint smile as she opened the door and slid into the back seat. The interior smelled faintly of air freshener, with a lingering trace of tobacco that made her wrinkle her nose. As the car eased back into traffic, Layla glanced out the window, letting the city's rhythm distract her. Harry, the driver, seemed quiet at first, focused on the road, but as they moved further away from her office, he began to speak. "Long day at work?" he asked, his voice cutting through the low hum of the car engine. Layla glanced up from her phone, slightly surprised by the small talk. "Yeah, it's been busy," she replied noncommittally, hoping to keep the conversation short. "Corporate world, huh?" He chuckled, though it sounded more cynical than friendly. "Must be nice, though, dressing sharp, making the big bucks." Layla felt a flicker of discomfort. It wasn't the first time a stranger had made assumptions about her life based on appearances. She gave a neutral response. It has its challenges. Harry didn't seem satisfied with her answer. His eyes met hers briefly in the rearview mirror, lingering a second too long. "You live alone? Must be hard coming back to an empty place after a long day." The question caught her off guard. It was invasive, too personal, but she tried to brush it off lightly. "I manage." The driver chuckled again, but this time there was something unsettling in his tone. "Yeah, I bet you do." Layla shifted in her seat, her grip tightening on her phone. The atmosphere in the car began to shift subtly. The air felt heavier, the hum of the engine too loud. She glanced at the app's map, tracking their route. The car was still on course, but she couldn't shake the unease creeping into her thoughts. As the journey continued, Harry's questions became increasingly intrusive. He asked about her job, her schedule, and even her family. Each query was framed casually, as if he were merely making conversation. But Layla noticed the way his gaze flicked to her through the mirror, the way his tone held an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite name. "Nice watch," he remarked suddenly, nodding toward her wrist. "Bet that cost a pretty penny." Layla instinctively covered the watch band with her hand, forcing a polite smile. It was a gift. Harry didn't reply, but his expression darkened slightly. Layla turned her attention back to the app, now fixating on the road. Her heart skipped when she noticed the car veer slightly off course. The new route was still parallel to the original, but it wasn't what the app had displayed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't the way it showed on the app." Harry's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles whitening. "Relax," he muttered. "Just avoiding some traffic. This way's faster." Layla's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Maybe he was right. Maybe he knew a shortcut. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the nagging feeling in her chest wouldn't subside. As the streets grew quieter and less familiar, the unease became impossible to ignore. Layla considered her options. Should she confront him again, demand he return to the original route, or would that provoke him further? Her phone vibrated with a notification, breaking her train of thought. She glanced at it, a message from the app reminding her of safety features, like the emergency contact button. Her fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to press it. Harry's voice interrupted her. "You seem nervous," he said, his tone casual but edged with something sharp. "You don't trust me?" Layla's heart pounded, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I just want to make sure we're on the right route." "We are," he snapped, the earlier pretense of friendliness slipping away. "I've been doing this job longer than you've been alive. I know what I'm doing." The tension in the car was palpable now. Layla's instincts screamed at her to act, but she didn't know what to do. She forced herself to look calm, her mind racing through possibilities. All she could do was hope this was a misunderstanding, a minor detour, nothing more. But deep down, she knew something was wrong, and it was only just beginning. The car slowed to a stop, the faint glow of the street lights revealing an unfamiliar street. Layla frowned as she looked around. This wasn't her destination. She double-checked the map on her phone, confirming what she already knew. They were far from where they were supposed to be. "Why are we stopping here?" she asked, her voice measured but firm. Harry shifted in his seat and turned to face her, his expression unreadable at first, but there was something unsettling in the way he looked at her, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Here's the deal," he said, his voice suddenly devoid of the thin veneer of professionalism he'd maintained earlier. "The fare's gonna cost you double. Special route fees, you know." Layla stared at him incredulous. "What? That's not how it works. The app calculates the fare automatically." Harry let out a low chuckle, leaning back in his seat. "The app doesn't know these streets like I do. This route, it's safer, faster. You're paying for my expertise." Her fingers tightened around her phone. "I'm not paying a cent more than what the app shows. If there's an issue, I'll contact customer support." The shift in Harry's demeanor was instantaneous. His face hardened, his lips curling into a sneer. "Customer support? You think they'll get here before I'm done with you?" The threat hung in the air, and for the first time, fear crept into Layla's chest. She tried to remain calm, her thoughts racing as she considered her options. "Listen," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I don't want any trouble. Let's just go back to the original route, and I'll pay what I owe." Harry's laugh was cold and joyless. "Trouble? You think you can just talk your way out of this? People like you always think you're so smart, so entitled." Layla blinked, confused. "What do you mean, people like me?" His eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, she saw something dark and hateful in them. "Oh, come on," he spat. "Don't play dumb. You walk around like you own the world. Fancy job, nice clothes, expensive watch. You think that gives you the right to look down on people like me?" Layla was stunned. The aggression in his tone was unprovoked, his words dripping with resentment. She'd barely spoken to him during the ride, but somehow he'd formed this narrative in his head, and now it was spiraling out of control. "That's not," she began, but he cut her off. "Save it," he snapped. "You're all the same. Always trying to get something for nothing. Well, not this time." He reached over and pressed a button on the dashboard. With a chilling click, the doors locked. Layla's stomach dropped. She instinctively tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Unlock the doors," she demanded, her voice sharper now. "Let me out." Harry turned in his seat, fully facing her now. His smile was thin and menacing. "Not until we settle this. You owe me, and I'm not letting you go until I get what I'm owed." The small space of the car seemed to close in on her, the air thick with tension. Layla's pulse quickened as she tried to think. She could scream, but the street was deserted. There was no one around to hear her. "Look," she said, keeping her voice calm, "I'll pay what the app shows. That's fair. But if you keep me here, it's kidnapping. Do you really want to go down that road?" Harry's expression didn't waver. "Kidnapping?" he repeated mockingly. "You're sitting in my car. I'm just trying to get paid for my time. You call that kidnapping?" Layla's mind raced. She couldn't afford to let him see how scared she was. Fear would only embolden him. She needed to think clearly, to find a way out. She glanced at her phone. The emergency button in the app was her best option, but she'd need to act quickly. She adjusted her grip, angling the phone so he wouldn't see what she was doing. "What's the matter?" Harry taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Got nothing to say now?" Layla ignored him, focusing on her phone. Her thumb hovered over the emergency icon, but before she could press it, Harry lunged forward, grabbing the device from her hands. "Nice try," he growled, tossing the phone onto the front passenger seat. "But I'm not stupid." She felt a surge of helplessness, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. She wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. "Fine," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "What do you want?" Harry leaned back, his expression smug. "I told you, double the fare. Pay up, and I'll let you go." Layla's eyes narrowed. "And how do I know you'll keep your word?" He grinned, a toothy, unsettling smile. "You don't. But you don't have much of a choice, do you?" Her mind worked furiously, analyzing the situation. He was trying to intimidate her, to make her feel powerless. But she wasn't powerless. Not entirely. She still had her wits, and she intended to use them. Harry's eyes flicked to her watch again, and she noticed the way his gaze lingered. "That's a nice piece you've got there," he said. "Bet it's worth more than this ride." Layla crossed her arms, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. If he thought she'd cave easily, he was in for a surprise. The car was quiet for a moment, the tension crackling like static in the air. Layla's heart pounded, but her face remained impassive. She wasn't going to let him see her fear. Harry finally broke the silence. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your call." Layla met his gaze in the mirror, her eyes steely. "Then I guess it's going to be the hard way." The battle lines were drawn. The real fight was just beginning. The atmosphere inside the car had shifted from uneasy tension to outright hostility. Harry's smug grin only deepened the pit of dread in Layla's stomach. The air felt suffocating, every breath thick with fear and the sharp tang of her own adrenaline. The locked doors were a physical reminder of her entrapment, and the shadows outside offered no reprieve. The street was deserted, not a single passerby in sight. "Let me make this simple for you," Harry said, his voice low but filled with menace. "You pay what I'm asking, or things are going to get unpleasant." Layla clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Her mind raced through her options, but each one felt riskier than the last. Running was impossible with the doors locked. Screaming seemed useless on such a quiet street. She needed a plan, something quick, something smart. "I don't have that kind of cash," she said, forcing her voice to sound steady. She wasn't lying. She rarely carried more than a small amount, relying instead on her cards and digital payments. "If you'll let me out, I can transfer it to you through the app." Harry's laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "Do I look stupid to you? You think I don't know you'll run straight to the cops the second you're out of this car?" Layla kept her expression calm, though inside she was unraveling. She needed to buy time, to keep him talking while she figured out her next move. "You're making a mistake," she said evenly. "Whatever money you think you'll get isn't worth what happens when the police get involved." That struck a nerve. Harry's jaw tightened and his knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel. "Don't you get it?" he snapped, his voice rising. "No one's coming to save you. Out here, it's just you and me." The finality in his tone sent a shiver down Layla's spine, but she refused to show it. Instead, she glanced around the car, cataloging every detail. The worn leather seats, the empty water bottle rolling on the floor, the faint glow of the dashboard lights. Her gaze landed on the glove compartment, and a sliver of hope sparked in her mind. If she could find something, anything, to defend herself, she might have a chance. Harry seemed to notice her shift in focus. "Don't even think about it," he warned, leaning back in his seat and reaching for something under the dashboard. When his hand re-emerged, it held a flashlight. Not particularly menacing, but its weight and metal casing made its potential clear. "You think you're smart," he said, his tone mocking, "always looking for a way out. But let me tell you something, sweetheart. You're not in control here. I am." The words hit Layla like a slap, but they also reignited her resolve. She wasn't going to let him dictate how this ended. She needed to keep her wits about her, to stay calm and look for an opening. "Fine," she said, her voice softer now, almost placating. "You win. I'll pay what you're asking." Harry narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious of her sudden compliance. "Just like that?" "What choice do I have?" Layla replied, forcing a weary sigh. "You've got me trapped here. I just want to go home." Her tone must have convinced him because he relaxed slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing. He gestured toward her phone, still lying on the passenger seat. "Good. Now unlock it and make the payment." This was her moment. Layla reached forward, slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of her phone. But instead of picking it up, she shoved it further onto the seat, forcing Harry to lean over to retrieve it. The instant his attention was diverted, she lunged for the glove compartment. Her fingers scrabbled against the latch before it popped open. Inside, she found an old map, a pair of gloves, and, most importantly, a fire extinguisher. It was small, meant for emergencies, but in her hands it was a lifeline. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harry roared, turning back to face her. His hand shot toward her wrist, but Layla was faster. She grabbed the extinguisher and aimed it directly at his face, pressing down on the nozzle. The burst of white powder was immediate and blinding. Harry let out a strangled yell, recoiling as the chemical spray enveloped him. Layla didn't hesitate. She threw her weight against the door, jamming the lock mechanism repeatedly until it finally clicked open. She tumbled out of the car, hitting the pavement hard. Her palms stung from the impact, but she didn't stop to check them. Scrambling to her feet, she darted away from the vehicle, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Get back here!" Harry bellowed, his voice hoarse and furious. She glanced over her shoulder and saw him stumbling out of the car, wiping at his eyes with one hand while clutching the flashlight in the other. Layla's heart raced as she scanned the street. There were no other cars, no open businesses, no one to help. Her phone was still in Harry's possession, and the app's emergency button was useless without it. She had only one option: run. She sprinted down the street, her heels clicking loudly against the asphalt. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but she pushed herself harder, driven by the sheer will to survive. Behind her, she could hear Harry's heavy footsteps growing closer. "Stop running!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the buildings. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Layla didn't reply. She didn't dare look back again. Her eyes were fixed on the faint glow of headlights in the distance. A car was approaching, her only chance at escape. She waved her arms frantically, shouting at the top of her lungs, "Help! Please, stop!" The vehicle slowed, its high beams illuminating her in the dark. It was a pickup truck, driven by an older man who looked startled but concerned. He rolled down the window as she approached, his brow furrowed. "What's going on?" he asked. "Please, I need help," Layla panted, her voice trembling. "That man! He's trying to hurt me!" The driver's eyes flicked to the figure behind her, and his expression darkened. Harry had stopped several yards away, glaring at them both. He raised his hands as if in surrender, his face a mask of feigned innocence. "She's lying," he called out, his tone smooth and practiced. "She tried to rob me, and now she's running." The driver hesitated, clearly unsure whom to believe. Layla seized the moment, leaning closer to the window. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "He's dangerous. You have to call the police." The man nodded slowly, his hand moving toward his phone. But before he could make the call, Harry turned and bolted back toward his car. Layla watched as he jumped in, the engine roaring to life. In seconds, he was gone, disappearing down the street. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she sank to the ground, her chest heaving. The driver stepped out of the truck, his phone pressed to his ear. "It's going to be okay," he said gently, crouching beside her. "I'm calling the cops right now." For the first time that night, Layla allowed herself to believe him. But even as relief washed over her, a new determination took root. This wasn't over. Not yet. The police lights painted the street in pulsating shades of blue and red. Layla sat on the curb, her knees drawn close to her chest, trembling from the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The pickup driver stood nearby, giving his account to an officer. She overheard snippets of their conversation. blocked the doors, chased her. Dangerous man. She wasn't listening fully. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Harry was still out there, and her phone, her lifeline, was in his possession. That fact alone made her feel vulnerable, exposed. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing. The officer who had been speaking to her earlier approached again, a kind but firm expression on her face. "Miss Malik," the officer said gently, crouching beside her. "We'll circulate his description and the car's details immediately. We've already put out an alert. Are you sure you're okay?" Layla nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "He has my phone," she said, her voice steadier now. "My entire life is on there, my contacts, my address." The officer nodded. "We'll do everything we can to recover it. For now, we'll escort you home." Layla hesitated. Home? The one place where she should feel safe now felt like a liability. What if Harry came looking for her? What if he already knew where she lived? "No," she said abruptly, standing. "I can't go home. Not until you find him." The officer exchanged a glance with her partner, who stood by the squad car. "Is there someone you can stay with? Family? A friend?" Layla swallowed hard, her mind flickering to the one person she trusted completely. "My husband, James. He's a captain with the precinct." The officer's expression softened. "Good. Let's take you to him." As the squad car pulled away, Layla kept her gaze fixed on the passing streets, her mind racing. Harry's face, his hateful sneer, replayed in her thoughts like a broken record. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay focused. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. She had to think, to plan. When they arrived at the precinct, James was already waiting. His tall, imposing figure radiated calm authority, but the moment his eyes met Layla's, his stoic expression cracked. He crossed the room in quick strides, pulling her into a protective embrace. "Layla," he said, his voice heavy with worry. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she managed, her voice muffled against his chest. "But he's still out there." James pulled back, his sharp eyes scanning her face. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. "You're safe now." Layla wanted to believe him, but safety felt like a distant concept. "James," she said, gripping his arm, "this isn't just about me. That man, he's done this before. I could see it in the way he acted. He knew exactly what he was doing." James's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make sure it's the last time." The precinct buzzed with activity as James mobilized his team. Layla sat in his office sipping a cup of lukewarm tea one of the officers had brought her. She watched through the glass as James barked orders, his usual calm replaced by a fiery determination. It was a side of him she rarely saw, a man who wouldn't rest until justice was served. But Layla couldn't just sit and wait. She wasn't the type to be a passive observer. She began replaying the events in her mind, analyzing every detail, every word Harry had said. Something about his demeanor, his confidence, suggested he had done this before and gotten away with it. She stood, setting the tea aside, and walked into the bullpen. James spotted her immediately and approached. "Layla, you should be resting," he said, concern etched into his features. "I can't," she replied, her voice firm. "I need to help. There's something we're missing." James studied her for a moment before nodding. "Okay, tell me everything you remember." For the next hour, Layla recounted the ordeal in painstaking detail. She described Harry's appearance, his mannerisms, the car, and every word he had spoken. As she spoke, patterns began to emerge. "He mentioned the streets," she said suddenly. "He said he knew them better than the app, like he had some kind of advantage." James frowned. "If he's familiar with the area, He might have a place he goes to, somewhere he feels safe. Or somewhere he's taken others, Layla added, the thought sending a chill down her spine. James nodded, his mind already working. He called over one of his detectives and began outlining a plan. Check his rideshare profile, he said. Look for inconsistencies, complaints, unusual routes. Cross-reference it with reports of similar incidents. The detective nodded and got to work. Layla watched as the pieces began to fall into place, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Hours passed, and the precinct quieted as the night deepened. Layla sat at James's desk, scrolling through the rideshare app on a spare phone the officers had given her. She looked at her trip history, her stomach sinking as she saw the unfinished ride marked as in progress. She tapped the driver's profile. Harry's photo stared back at her, his smile forced and insincere. Beneath it were dozens of reviews, most positive, but a few stood out. Uncomfortable experience. Driver took a strange route. Seemed aggressive when asked about the fare. Her heart pounded as she read the comments. There were patterns here, clear signs that Harry had been a problem for a long time, and yet he was still driving. This isn't his first time, she said aloud, showing James the reviews when he returned to the office. People have complained, but nothing's been done. James's expression darkened as he scanned the screen. We'll make sure that changes. Just then, one of the detectives burst into the room, holding a printout. We've got something, he said, handing it to James. A report from 2 months ago. A woman filed a complaint against a driver matching Harry's description. Same pattern. Detour, locked doors, threats. But she dropped the case. Why? Layla asked, her voice sharp. She said she was too scared to pursue it, the detective replied. Layla's stomach churned. We can't let him get away with it again. James placed a hand on her shoulder. We won't, he promised. But I need you to trust me. Let us handle this. Layla nodded reluctantly, but as James walked away, her resolve hardened. Trusting the system was one thing, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more she could do. Harry had underestimated her, just as he had underestimated his other victims. But this time, he'd made a mistake. This time, Layla was ready to fight back. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the precinct's windows, its warmth doing little to ease the tension that gripped Layla. She hadn't slept. Her mind replayed the events of the night over and over, each memory sharper, more vivid than before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Harry's twisted smirk, heard his venomous words. But fear was no longer the dominant emotion coursing through her. It was anger. In James's office, the investigation had gained momentum. Maps were spread across the desk, dotted with red pins marking locations tied to Harry's route history. Officers moved with purpose, gathering intel, cross-referencing complaints, and tracking Harry's last known movements. Layla stood at the edge of the room, watching as her husband took command. His presence, calm but unyielding, was a source of comfort and inspiration. Anything? James asked, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of activity. One of the detectives nodded, stepping forward with a folder. We managed to track his vehicle through traffic cameras. He drove west after abandoning the scene last night. There's a cluster of unregistered warehouses in that area. It's possible he's hiding there. James studied the map, his fingers tracing the highlighted path. What about his history? Did we find any connections to those locations? The detective flipped through the folder, pulling out a sheet. He used to work as a delivery driver years ago. The warehouses were a part of his route. If he's familiar with the area, It could explain why he took her there. Layla stepped forward, her voice cutting through the conversation. He didn't just take me there by chance. He's done this before. He was too confident, too rehearsed. James looked at her, his expression firm. We've already connected him to a few similar complaints, but none of the victims pressed charges. That's why he's still out there, Layla said bitterly, because no one held him accountable. James nodded, his eyes locking with hers. That ends today. As the investigation pressed on, Layla couldn't sit idle. Her phone was still in Harry's possession, and she couldn't shake the thought of him going through it, learning more about her life. She'd already changed her passwords and locked her accounts, but the violation felt personal, invasive. She needed to act. She approached one of the officers handling the digital side of the case. "Is there any way to track my phone?" she asked, her tone urgent. "It could lead us straight to him." The officer hesitated. "If the phone's turned on and connected to a network, we can trace it. But if he's disabled it or put it in airplane mode, it won't work." "Try anyway," Layla pressed. "Please." The officer nodded and began typing. Layla's heart pounded as she watched the screen. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before he finally spoke. "We've got a signal," he said. "It's weak, but it's coming from one of the warehouses west of the city." James joined them, his attention snapping to the officer. "Confirm the location and send it to the team. We're moving now." The ride to the warehouses was tense. Layla sat in the back of a police SUV, flanked by 2 officers. James was in another vehicle ahead, leading the charge. The streets blurred past her as they sped toward the coordinates, each passing second tightening the knot in her stomach. "You don't have to be here," one of the officers said, glancing at her. "It's dangerous." "I do," Layla replied firmly. "This isn't just about me. It's about making sure he never does this to anyone else." The officer nodded, respecting her determination but still wary of the risks. The convoy of police vehicles arrived at the warehouse district, their presence disrupting the eerie silence of the abandoned area. The warehouses stood like hulking giants, their rusted metal walls and shattered windows bearing the scars of neglect. Officers fanned out, weapons drawn, as they began to sweep the area. Layla stayed behind with a smaller group, her pulse racing as she watched the officers move with precision. She wanted to be out there, to confront Harry herself, but she knew better than to jeopardize the operation. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching unbearably. Then a shout broke the silence. "We've got movement!" Layla's heart leapt as she saw officers converge on one of the warehouses. The door creaked open, and a figure emerged. It was Harry. He looked different now, stripped of the bravado he'd displayed the night before. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic as he raised his hands in surrender. Layla felt a surge of emotion, relief, anger, vindication, as she watched him being cuffed and led away. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Back at the precinct, Harry sat in an interrogation room, his smugness slowly returning. He leaned back in the chair, his expression defiant as James questioned him. "I didn't do anything wrong," Harry said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She's just another stuck-up—" "Stop," James interrupted, his voice cold. "We've got enough evidence to put you away. The phone, the complaints, the footage, you're done." Harry's grin faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You think anyone's going to care? No one pressed charges before. They were too scared. She will be too." James leaned in, his voice low and deadly. "You don't know my wife." Layla watched through the observation window, her hands trembling as she listened. Hearing Harry's words brought back every moment of fear she'd felt, but they also fueled her determination. This wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming her power. When James exited the room, he found her waiting. "It's up to the system now," he said, his tone apologetic but firm. "We've done everything we can." "No," Layla replied, her voice steady. "There's more to do. He's been getting away with this because no one speaks out. I'm not going to be silent." James studied her for a moment, pride and concern mingling in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure," she said. "This ends here." The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffle of papers and the occasional murmur from the audience. Layla sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her husband, James, was beside her, his presence a source of quiet strength. Across the room, Harry sat with his lawyer, his demeanor oscillating between defiance and unease. The trial had drawn attention, not just because of the details of Layla's case, but because of the broader implications. Harry's history of harassment and intimidation had finally come to light. Dozens of reports, once ignored or dismissed, were now part of the official record. Layla's decision to press charges had given other victims the courage to come forward, creating a damning case against him. The prosecution had laid out its argument meticulously. Harry's manipulative tactics, his exploitation of power dynamics, and his reliance on fear to silence his victims were all exposed. The evidence was overwhelming. The ride history, the recovered footage from traffic cameras, the testimony of witnesses who had encountered Harry's aggression in the past. Layla's stolen phone, found in his car, had further solidified the charges. But the most powerful moment came when Layla took the stand. She walked to the witness box with steady steps, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. The courtroom seemed to blur around her as she focused on the task at hand. This wasn't just about her, it was about every person who had suffered in silence, too afraid to speak out. The prosecutor began with gentle, supportive questions, guiding Layla through her testimony. She recounted the events of that night in vivid detail: the detour, the locked doors, the threats, and her eventual escape. Her voice wavered at times, but she pushed through, determined to be heard. When it was the defense's turn, Harry's lawyer tried to discredit her. The questions were pointed, laced with insinuations meant to undermine her credibility. "Isn't it true that you overreacted?" the lawyer asked, his tone calm but accusatory. "That you misunderstood the situation?" Layla's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "No," she said firmly, "there was no misunderstanding. He locked the doors. He demanded more money. He threatened me." The lawyer leaned forward, feigning curiosity. "And yet, you claim to have remained calm during most of this ordeal. Doesn't that seem unusual?" "I stayed calm because I had to," Layla replied, her voice rising slightly. "But that doesn't mean I wasn't terrified." The lawyer smirked, as if he had caught her in a lie. Terrified, yet capable of fighting back? "Isn't it possible that you provoked him?" Layla stared at him, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "I defended myself," she said, "because no one else was there to do it." Her words hung in the air, silencing the courtroom. When her testimony concluded, Layla returned to her seat, her hands trembling slightly. James reached over, squeezing her hand in reassurance. She exhaled deeply, grateful for his support, but still nervous about the outcome. The trial wasn't just about her, it was a test of the system, a chance to prove that justice could prevail. The closing arguments were impassioned. The prosecutor emphasized Harry's pattern of behavior, his deliberate targeting of vulnerable individuals and his brazen disregard for the law. The defense tried to paint Harry as a victim of circumstance, a man pushed to desperation by a difficult life. But the jury's expressions suggested skepticism. When the judge dismissed the court for deliberation, Layla felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The waiting was agonizing, every second stretching into eternity. She paced the hallway outside the courtroom, her thoughts a whirlwind of hope and doubt. James joined her, his presence grounding her. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you did everything you could. You were brave." She nodded, though the weight of the moment still pressed heavily on her. "I just want him to be held accountable," she said, "not just for me, but for everyone he hurt." Hours later, the jury returned. The room fell silent as the foreperson stood, holding the verdict in her hands. Layla held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone in the room could hear it. The foreperson spoke clearly, her voice steady. "On the charges of unlawful imprisonment, extortion, and harassment, we find the defendant, Harry Collins, guilty." The words hit Layla like a wave, washing over her in a rush of relief and vindication. She exhaled sharply, tears springing to her eyes as the weight of the past few weeks finally lifted. James squeezed her hand again, his expression a mixture of pride and gratitude. Harry's reaction was a mix of disbelief and fury. He shouted something unintelligible as the bailiffs moved to restrain him, but Layla barely registered it. Her focus was on the verdict, on the knowledge that justice had finally been served. In the days that followed, Layla's story spread. News outlets covered the trial, focusing not just on Harry's crimes, but on the broader issue of accountability within the rideshare industry. Layla agreed to a few interviews, sharing her experience in the hopes of inspiring others to come forward. Her story resonated. Messages poured in from people who had faced similar situations, thanking her for her courage and sharing their own experiences. Layla read each one, her resolve strengthening with every word. But she didn't stop there. With James's support, she began working on an initiative to improve safety measures within the rideshare industry. She pushed for stricter background checks, more robust reporting systems, and better support for victims of harassment and assault. The initiative gained traction, attracting the attention of policymakers and advocacy groups. Layla's determination to turn her pain into progress became a beacon for others, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, change was possible. One evening, as she sat on the couch with James, Layla reflected on the journey she had taken. The fear and anger that had once consumed her had transformed into something powerful, something that could make a difference. "You know," she said softly, "if I could go back and change that night, make it so it never happened, I'm not sure I would." James looked at her surprised. "Why?" "Because it brought me here," she said, "to this moment, to this fight. And if it means helping others, then maybe it was worth it." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're incredible, you know that?" Layla smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. Harry was behind bars, and while the scars of that night might never fully fade, they had shaped her into someone stronger. And she knew, deep down, that her fight for justice was only just beginning. If you liked this story, support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos. Share this video with your friends so that they too can recognize this story. And don't forget to check out the channel for other equally interesting stories. Thanks for watching.